Today on Across the Fence, get a bird's eye view of life in Vermont and make tweeting fun again. It's time for Bird Notes with Mark LeBar from Audubon, Vermont. Hello, Vermont. Well, I don't know about you, but I have spent the last month reveling in birdsong. On Father's Day alone, hiking to the Cascades along the Abbey Pond Trail in Addison County. Okay, are you ready for this, Mark? Okay, I heard a black and white warbler, a red-eyed vireo, some black-capped chickadees, a scarlet tanager, and an indigo bunting. So what do you think about that?
That is a good run of birds, and it's great to get out. You know, some of those I've been hearing an indigo bunting every morning at my house. They're singing away, and the black and whites. And
that black and white warbler has a very distinctive sound.
The squeaky wheel.
The squeaky wheel. I read about the squeaky wheel. Yeah. Well, by the way, happy Father's Day.
Thank you.
That's what we were doing at the Cascades.
Yeah.
Did you have a nice Father's Day?
I did, and you know, I just hung out. You know, it's field season. I'm constantly moving, and so it was nice. And of course, I watched a little World Cup.
Oh yeah, oh that's right. You know, yes, I mean this is the time for it.
Some of us birders have other things on our mind.
I don't know. I sort of feel like I'm a little disoriented if you're talking about anything other than birding. But okay, so I mentioned my black and white warbler, and that also got me very excited because last month we talked so much about warblers, and this month I think we're going to take kind of a deep dive into the world of warblers and some work that Audubon Vermont's doing in Land Trust.
So you know, last month we talked a little bit about golden-winged and blue-winged warblers, and right now we are working on what we're calling the Golden Chain Collaborative.
Okay.
And it's a collaborative effort between the Cornell Lab of Ornithology and their Land Trust program and the Vermont Land Trust and Audubon Vermont, and it's basically working with land trusts and other places, other organizations like, you know, the state agencies, protected lands kind of stuff, to focus on managing habitat for golden-winged warblers. They're a priority species.
What makes them a priority species?
Their populations are declining across much of their range, and they range from the southern Appalachians, the Appalachians up through the Great Lakes, and it's the Appalachian population which is really getting seeing these declines. But we have golden-winged warblers here in the Champlain Valley primarily. And because of that, we've been working with the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and Cornell and other programs to work with public and private landowners to maintain and enhance habitat for these birds.
And so is the trust and is the collaborative only focusing on the golden-winged warblers, or
no,
are there other birds?
Well, you know, with golden wings, this early successional young forest shrubland habitat is host to a lot of species of greatest conservation need by the state of Vermont. And, you know, eastern towhees, brown thrashers, prairie warblers, American woodcock. So by managing and enhancing this habitat for golden-winged warblers and blue-winged warblers, we're also creating habitat for these other birds.
Okay, yeah, and I think, we were just looking at, we saw some warblers here. What's this one?
So this is a golden-winged warbler. This is, you know, we do a lot of banding, and so this is what a golden wing, some of them have a little bit, the two wing bars there connect. But you know, this is a classic look with that black bib and the black eye, compared to its very close relative, the blue-winged warbler. And this is pretty much an all-yellow bird, and it gets its name. It's got a little blue up on the corner there,
just a tiny
little bit,
right above that little bit of white. Okay.
So these two birds breed in the same habitat, sing each other's songs, and they hybridize.
Okay.
So, and when they cross and they breed, you get birds like this, which is called a Brewster's warbler. So we see all of these on the Vermont landscape, both golden wings, blue wings, and the hybrids can be very diverse in nature. And these are the species we're really trying to protect.
Okay, so talk to them a little bit, because this is about habitat, right? You're talking about land trust, you're talking about habitats. Talk a little bit about what these birds like.
Well, you know, the land trust program is great because it allows us to connect with landowners. That are connected to the land trust, whether through easements that the land trusts have. But you know, these birds really like, again, what we call young forest early successional habitat. So oftentimes old fields, you know, where vegetation is just starting to come in, but you still have a lot of trees around it. They nest on the ground.
Okay.
These two birds are very close to the ground.
Okay.
So shrubs like dogwoods and viburnums that are next to a forested habitat are what these birds really need. And you need to maintain it because it's constantly wanting to grow in, oftentimes with invasive plant species.
Right, okay. And I think that we had some images of what the habitat looks like. I don't know if this is disturbed.
Yeah, that's kind of classic.
That's classic, okay.
Yeah,
so open, right?
Open patches. There's some taller trees for the birds to sing on. Then there's all these low shrubs where they nest in. And then that deciduous forest background, which is really important for these species.
And what do they eat?
They are, well, the genus is Vermivora, which means worm eater. So they eat a whole host of insects, but they do, you know, I've seen a number of warblers out there this year that are, it's time when they're nesting, and oftentimes you see them carrying around caterpillars or other creepy crawlies like that.
Okay. All right. So last month you talked about the golden wing warbler habitat. I think you talked a little bit about like the habitat and projects at Audubon for it, and you brought pictures this time too, because we're going to take a look here. I think this is some restoration projects you've been working on?
Yeah, you know, when we go out and when we work with landowners, land trusts, and this is where the Golden Chain Collaborative really comes into play because we make that connection with landowners. We often use a number of different techniques, but the one that has been the most successful is removing invasive plant species, honeysuckle, buckthorn, from these shrubland areas. We often do that using, you can see here over in the corner, there's what I call a grinder or a bullhog, which is able to go in and selectively take out the invasive shrubs while leaving the native shrubs alone.
Okay.
And so that's how we maintain that open habitat. And when we work with landowners, many of them are, you know, are fans of golden-winged warblers, but many of them are also just want to get some invasives off their land. So it's a great combination.
Well, I know, if I'm not wrong, one of the farms that you've been doing this with is the former Nordic farm?
That's correct. Yes. So we worked with Cornell has a land trust grant program, which we've received 2 of them. One for Nordic, which is just in Shelburne, and then you go right across the street and you're at the Charlotte Park and Wildlife Refuge, and we've used Cornell money to manage for that. And they host a wide variety of the winged warblers, blue wings, golden wings, the hybrids, as well as field sparrows, towhees.
So does this mean that that's an area where, for those of us who are now like, I kind of like to go and want to see one of those, is that a good spot where we might go taking a look?
So the Charlotte Wildlife Park is. Nordic is still private property, and so, but
that's right, we can't go wandering onto private property.
So Charlotte Wildlife Park and Wildlife Refuge in Heinsberg, there's Japrague's Park, but things are getting quiet now. These birds are not really singing anymore. They only do one brood. So they're busy feeding. So you may have some luck, but oftentimes it's better in May and earlier in June.
Okay. Well, so now can we talk about the restoration efforts, you know, trying to make better habitats for the birds, entice them in. How do you know when it's working?
So that requires Audubon staff and volunteers to go out to these areas and do surveys, dedicated surveys, where we will look for these birds, and we do something called playback, which since we're surveying, we're allowed to do, where we broadcast the call. And that will often elicit a response from a bird, and we can see them come in. And so the other route that we do, working with the Golden Chain Collaborative, is work with volunteers through eBird. And so we've set up a way for birders that are out, you know, looking for golden blue-winged warblers to share their checklist with us through eBird. So we get a lot of data that way as well.
That's very cool. Okay, so talk then about like bringing these types of groups together. Is this difficult? I mean, we'll bring it back to maybe that golden chain.
Yeah, the beautiful thing about Vermont is many of us in the conservation field, bird conservation field, we know each other well. We're in multiple meetings. It's a small state. And so it was pretty easy to bring together. This past May, we did a golden chain workshop in Charlotte, visited the Charlotte Park, And we were able to bring in, the Vermont Land Trust, the Nature Conservancy, folks from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the Vermont Department of Fish and Wildlife, as well as a number of other smaller land trusts, and bring them out to the park. We saw 2 golden wings that morning, so that was great. Show them the habitat.
Proof of concept.
Yes, exactly. Show them what the habitat looks like and describe what we did when we received that Cornell money. And then hopefully now the next stage will be to meet with those land trusts on a one-to-one basis and see if there are properties that may be interested in pursuing some of this work.
Yeah, it's like a win-win.
It's great.
Okay, all right. Well, we haven't had a ton of bird pictures today. Sorry, folks, you had to look at habitat and you know, grinders, but we do have an image from a viewer because last month I shared a waxwing image. I said, could you identify it? And we said folks should send them in. And Brenda Ashley, you did. So what are we seeing here, Mark?
So this is interesting because, basically, this is what we call a leucistic bird, which is a bird that does not have any color plumage or color in its plumage.
Okay.
And this is a European starling, and it's a young European starling. You can see the 2 other starlings feeding on either side, and they're brownish. They don't quite get that black and speckled look that the adults get. But this bird is leucistic and almost completely leucistic. Sometimes you'll have birds that only have a feather or 2, or their head will be white and their body with that. It's pretty rare, especially to see it completely white like that. But I get calls every year from people that see leucistic birds in some form or another.
Well, I gotta say, I mean, good spotting on Brenda. Well done. And okay, so folks, do you have a bird question for Mark? Do you want to chat with him about the Audubon Birdathon? Because that's going on. Right there on the screen, you've got his address. Brenda, again, thank you for sending your lovely photo. Who's next? Send your sightings and questions, and Mark will wing it, on an upcoming Bird Notes, right? Yeah. Audience participation. I love it.
For sure.
What do you think we're going to talk about next month?
I don't know yet. We're still waiting for some of we did nano tagging with wood thrush, and we're still waiting for some of that data to come in. We're actually going to go out with a receiver to see if we can find some at different locations. So maybe wood thrushes.
Good. All right. So see, so much to look forward to, right? Well, thank you for joining me. This has been fun. And as always, Vermont, thank you for learning and exploring with me today. And thanks to the team that makes Across the Fence possible. I'm Amy Finley. This is Across the Fence. Come back and let's learn and explore again tomorrow.